Buonasera, benvenuti a
Good evening and welcome to GiovedìScienza, Science on a Thursday, and welcome Piero Angela, whom I would like to thank for coming here. When we chose this date, clearly we were far from thinking that we would be voting the Sunday after. So in some way we were lucky, because this conversation that we have with Piero Angela is taking place at a time when it's very topical. We will obviously not be talking about the elections, who to vote and why to vote, but we will be talking about the context whereby a country can start up again, employment increasing, and all these things. This is something which our politicians, the ones we will be electing Sunday and Monday, will have to answer, if not promoters, because it is not only a problem of political class. Certainly a good political class and a leadership is a plus, but very often it's the outcome also of a country which is working properly. So you have to understand what the cause and effect are. Can I say something? Can I add anything to Piero Angela? Well, first of all, he is one of the founders of GiovedìScienza, and he is the father of GiovedìScienza, Science on a Thursday, which you have been attending for 27 years. And the other thing which I like to say, I'm just going to say some of the least important things, because we know the important thing, 3 million books translated in many languages, but I would also like to say that he graduated in Turin, and he has a honoris causa degree here in physics. And while we're here, and with this I would close, I would also like to welcome the classes that have come from the Piano High School in Cuneo. Thank you very much for being here. And now I would like to stop, and I would like to hear Piero Angela speak. I would just like to recall his latest book, What is Politics For?, which you will find at the entrance, and I think that maybe Piero will sign it if you so wish. Let us now hear what he has to say, and then we'll prepare questions. Thank you very much, Piero Bianucci, who is one of the most famous popularizers of science. We worked with Quark in the past, and I admire you as a person, because he is a very, not only a journalist and a writer of books. How many books have you written? Fewer than you. Let's move on to the conference. But he's also a probe man. Now, yes, I believe that we all wonder what politics are for. I wrote this book, but these are things that I have been thinking of over many years, years of experience in different fields, but also in economics, to gain a better understanding of why Italy is in the situation that we're all aware of. I think there are a number of problems, and we'll be talking about them, and we will also be having some fragments of a film which we will be introducing. But I believe that, especially in Italy, apart from the ideologies in politics, which are very strong in Italy, and the very high level of conflict, I believe that we all are unable to focus on the role of politics. In fact, we believe that politicians are able to solve problems, that they are the ones who will help the country develop, grow, and make it more modern. Certainly, this is one of the important roles of politics. But politics per se does not generate wealth. Well, politics distributes wealth. Well, when it doesn't guzzle it, but that's another matter. Yes, we can talk about that later. But on the whole, let us say that politics is the form of distribution of wealth, and that it is the country as a whole that generates this first and foremost, productive activities, enterprises, artisans, and all those who at all levels contribute. Not only, but think of education, for instance. This, too, is one of the mechanisms that is at the core of generation of wealth. And then we know there's research, technology. In other words, the country as a whole. The country as a whole, which via a number of mechanisms which spread and which have very different rhythms, all contribute. I would like to now give you an example to highlight and illustrate this concept. And I would like to hone in on 3 countries that are very different, especially in terms of wealth. Sweden is the European country which has the highest per capita income, 28,000. This was a figure a few years ago, but that's the order of magnitude. Then Turkey, which is around 10,000 euros. And Burundi, 200 euros a year, which means about 60 cents a day. Now, if in Istanbul, for the elections, a politician were to say, dear friends, if you vote for me and if you elect me, I will give you Swedish wages and Swedish pensions. Clearly, they couldn't do so because the context of the country makes it unviable. Even if they went on strike, they had demonstrations, the country would be unable to yield this type of income. Or at least what would happen is what would happen in Greece or elsewhere, that you have currency that in fact is not able to guarantee is not guaranteed by the production, and then we have the spreads and the debts that we're all aware of. So this clearly indicates the fact that politics play a very important role if it is directed to improve and to develop all the things that generate wealth. But if we look in Italy at all the parameters, which are the ones that move a country towards a greater wealth, they're not very well placed. For example, research is disastrous situation. School is the same, university. But also all the things which contribute to the spread of information of modernity. The parameters, and we'll see some of these as far as the appeal of a country is true, because if a country fails to attract resources and investments, then it is clear that it will be facing major difficulties. So we have this aspect which is completely left aside or forgotten. Very often it has been said in the course of the election campaigns that you people talk about personality, struggle, power, taking sides, but you never talk about things, the objects of politics. When you talk about things, you promise things on housing, education, pensions, for example, unemployment. Now, unemployment, in fact, is the result of the inability of enterprises to meet a challenge which has become a global challenge and where we're lagging behind due to a number of different elements. So, for example, a plant grows and develops because the soil is fertile, because you add water, you add fertilizers. Now, in this case, you want fruits without putting what you need in to get the tree to grow. The other example I'd like to give to better illustrate my point is the so-called general example. If in Holland there were a major tsunami whereby the lowlands, the polders, were flooded with salted water, and we have 2 million Dutch people who have no land and no housing, we could move these, say, 2 million Dutch people in another part of the world. What would we find after, if we moved them to another country where there is no one? Would we find universities and campuses after 25 years or nothing? For example, we don't know, but let us say what happened in Germany. Germany, after the World War, was completely destroyed, but 25 years later, it was a thriving country. So people are the software of a country. It means rules, the ability to put the right people in the right place, innovation, knowledge, education, culture, the ability of a country to understand changes, the very fast changes that are taking place in the world. I have been thinking of a book over the past few days, a book which was published by MIT. Two researchers wrote about it. It's called The Race Against Technology. We have a lot of technology which is completely changing the world and our economics, and we haven't fully appreciated this. And unemployment is also due to the fact that machines are replacing human beings. This is becoming true. I mean, in the 30s, Keynes was saying this, but then it appeared to be in the distant future. Now it's here to stay. When I see debates on television, talk shows, when I read the interviews with politicians, I'm really worried and concerned by the fact that these people think that they're still living in the 20th century, when these were but inklings of the future, while now they're pervasive of all the areas of education, information, etc. Now, this is the context, the framework, and in the book I've written, I've been trying to understand for each field where things aren't working. Now, we are aware of the fact that there are issues that we have been tackling for years in Italy, because Italy, compared to other European countries, had a more complex history. We have a rather backward agricultural society till not so long ago. My father, for instance, I know that I was a rather late son, but he was born in 1857. He was a contemporary of Garibaldi, and there was high illiteracy at the time. In fact, people couldn't write. There is very interesting research and curious research on the marriage registries, 1870 roughly, where two young newlyweds out of 3 used to sign with the cross, and 3 girls out of 4. So that was a society where you use candles, and with a generation you move from candles to satellites. But this speed of change is something which creates a gap. It's a diverging gap. Technology and the ability to invent, to change things, but culture is unable to keep abreast. I think that this is the greatest problem, not only for us, because it is especially strong in Italy. I would like to start by showing you a short clip. Yes, the ability to attract funds and intelligence. Yes, in this case, it is not a matter of things that require decades or investments or I don't know what. It's merely something that can be done in a relatively short time. So I would like to show you this clip. How not to attract investments. The World Bank has a list of the best conditions for those who wish to invest. And here, let's see who is at the first. Singapore, Hong Kong, New Zealand, US, Denmark, Norway, the United Kingdom, Korea, Georgia, Australia, Finland, Malaysia, Sweden, Iceland, Ireland. And where's Italy? To find Italy, we've got to go down, 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 down. We've now reached 60th, there's Fiji, but we have to go further down to find Italy. Panama, Tonga, Antigua, Ghana, the Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Azerbaijan, the Dominican Republic, Trinidad, Kyrgyzstan, Turkey, Romania, and then Italy, 73rd most appealing country, because in terms of being able to establish a business. Let us see in particular the type of scores that Italy had as far as the various groups that the World Bank believes are important to attract investments. To register ownership, 39th. All right, here you have the attention for investors, 49th. Building permits, 103rd. Taxation, 131st. Power connections, electricity, 107th. How to obtain a credit, 104th place. Get a contract abided by, the ability of a contractor to be respected, 160th place. You don't need to change the constitution or billions of euros. It's simply a matter of wanting to do it, as happens elsewhere. Of these, there's one missing, which is very, very important in Italy: organized crime and corruption, which sees us in top position. Now, but how can you be competitive in these situations? Now, I've never heard a politician being involved in this. These are things that can be solved. Another important thing is that here in Turin, because one of the problems of being an appealing country is the fact that contracts should be upheld, but also the length of justice. Because people who come here and then have problems spend years going through the courts to be able then. There's one example, which I didn't talk about here, but it's very curious. You all are well aware of Rana, the company that makes agnolotti and pasta, RANA. He said that since he's opened factories elsewhere, to open a factory in Chicago, as from when he began the procedures to when he was able to start production, it took him 11 months. In Italy, 8 years. 8 years. But is that possible? So these things, they're things which I've never heard mentioned in the elections. You must be able to open a factory in 11 months at the most. Those who have to invest here, if they have to open a chocolate factory or something, they're not going to do it because 8 years is too long, when we also know that in Italy there's also corruption, there's organized crime, and the like. So these are major problems, but others can be solved. Now this leads us to think about what we should be involved in. For instance, everybody has their own proposal, but these are the real problems where, beyond and other than one's political orientation, well, politicians are a bit like bus drivers. They're the ones who decide where you go, turn right, turn left, forward, at what speed. But if they haven't got a bus, if their tires are flat, they can't go anywhere. So in this case, I think there's something else we could move on to, that is to say, education. But I wanted to add something about Turin. There's something very interesting in Turin. We know that there are courts have a backlog of cases going on for years, postponing and so on. Well, here in Turin, the President of the Court of Appeal, Barbuto, 2-3 years ago, introduced a system to accelerate and bring on the various ones. And in Turin, there is no case that had been that lasts more than 3 years, while in other places there are many, many more years. You know that this clip I've just shown you is from a program that is called Coming Out of the Tunnel, which I was on air last December. Well, Barbuto, the president of the Court of Appeal, he didn't change anything. The law's the same, but he, with a goodwill and with a bit of intelligence, he managed to do something. Sometimes regulations are enough, rules and bylaws. Exactly. And then we were talking about education. Is it possible that our country, which, where there are very many intelligent people, is one of the last as far as education goes, and as far as universities go too? Why? Why are we not more concerned with it? We know that there are some problems because if you introduce merit, you go against the series of problems, but we will have to do something. So this is, again, from the same program, a clip on the crisis, which shows the situation, not only the Italian one, which is quite well known, especially with those OECD tests, which are called the PISA tests, the PISA scores, but also to see what happens with the top ones. Amongst the top 5, and this is a test which was measuring the education at levels at 15, carried out in a number of different countries of the world, including Italy. And in the top 5, 4 are Asian countries. So this says a lot about how these emerging countries have focused on school and education, and I will be telling you something about that later, and obtained this success. And these are not, as it is explained in the clip, these are not quizzes, the PISA score. They were carried out, studies that were carried out with great care to assess the ability to think things out, the understanding of a text. Because in Italy, for instance, there are other tests which concern the general Italian population and the cultural level. They were carried out by a Canadian Statistics Institute 2 or 3 years ago. Such tests highlight how the level of education in that case was classified according to 5 different criteria. In Italy, there are 2 million people who are below the last level. That is to say, that's semi-illiterate. Well, again, but then there's 33% are on level 1, which means risk of being illiterate, just above illiteracy. Then another 33% level 2, and the third is the one that are mediocre. That is to say, according to this statistic, 71% of all the Italian position are mediocre or below. Of course, you have to really consider these statistics carefully, because they're worth what they're worth. There's full of people who are very intelligent, who are very good and able, who only attended 2 or 3 years at school. But if you compare it to other countries, you'll observe that the situation, in increasingly so, where the software, education, intelligence, and reasoning, and planning, managing new technologies is essential, these are in difficulty. In fact, in these tests, which concern students, in 1973, I then had I managed the second channel news, special news, which was called the Why News, because it was all about questions. And for the first time, one of these tests was discussed, the same Canadians who were doing it now, where Italy was in a very bad position. And one of the things was that if you get people to read a newspaper article, and this also concerns adults, but a very simple text, a news report, and then you ask people to summarize it. Well, Italy, in terms of the understanding of a text, was placed very low down. So I asked a reporter to go around, and he said that he spoke to a professor who said the understanding of a text. we haven't got this subject. At that point, it was pull our hair out. It is also true that you are able to interpret and so on, but we're really beyond. So we know that things are not as disastrous as they appear to be in Italy, but that things are very mottled. It's a very mottled picture. So let us now see what this clip has to offer, and which explains what is happening in the countries that are top of the list. The PISA OECD program measures the education levels of 15-year-olds in the most developed countries, but they do not simply see whether they have knowledge, but the ability to interpret and to rethink a text and to use it for a precise reason. In maths, for example, the ability to reason in quantitative terms and to use the tools to describe and foresee. For science, the ability to ask the right questions, to understand natural phenomena and draw conclusions with a scientific basis. In other words, the PISA program verifies whether youngsters know how to apply what was learned in the real world. What is the outcome for our 15-year-olds? Reading, 29th place. Maths, 33rd. Science, 34th. And their scores are well below the most advanced countries. The Asian countries top the list with Finland and Canada. Amongst all the examined countries, our one is the one with the most mottled one. In fact, the northern regions are well above the national average. Center is average, and the south, with the exception of Puglia and Abruzzo, are well below. It's a problem of expenditure. In fact, if we compare this and compare the data for 74 countries, the expenditure per student does not account is not the only one to account for the difference. For example, Japan, Israel, Portugal, the UK spend very little but obtain a lot. But Luxembourg, for example, or the US, Belgium spend a lot but get very bad results. So what makes an educational system better than another one other than studying? Let us see what are the hallmarks of the countries that top the list in analyzing according to the OECD. Japan broke with a very long tradition where you learn by rote by reducing by 30% the subjects to learn and eliminating 1 day school a week. Teachers are very free to decide what they can study, when they can invite people from outside the school. The Japanese school tries to promote initiative, critical thought, and data analysis, creativity, and the ability to solve problems. In Canada, 1 student out of 4 was born out of another country, and in 80% of the cases, when they get to school, they're not fluent in English. But Canada is not only one of the first in the PISA score, but in many countries, unlike many other countries, there are no difference between migrants and other students by the time they're 15. There's an ongoing assessment system, and they are also followed by the best teacher and tutored individually if so needed. In Finland, the teachers is one of the most prestigious professions, and you have to be in the top 10% graduates. As well as a degree, you also have to have an MA or MSc, and then attend a 4-year teacher training college. Singapore, knowing how to teach is considered more important than knowing your subject. This is why, after your degree, teachers have to follow the courses of the National Institute of Education, and then about 100 hours updating a year, and every year they are assessed. Their social status and their wages are like a doctor's or a judge's, but they roughly have 36 students per class. Shanghai, one of the megalopolises that has grown due to the migrants who've come, has talked or has focused on the improvement of the standards of teachers. The best schools help the others, sending teams of their best teachers, some of whom are retired and who work with their colleagues for a few years. And there's a very significant figure. That is to say, the best teachers are given to the most, sent to the most difficult schools. Result is that the children are some of the best students according to the PISA score. Germany, whatever recipe you choose to change, you need a mobilization in the whole country. When in Germany they discovered in the year 2000 that about a fourth of their students didn't learn a lot and that they were well below the most advanced countries, they rang the alarm bell and started a reform of the school system. So in a matter of 9 years, the German students went from the 21st to the 15th place. Well, Italy, well, schools can improve in a matter of a few years, so we too can do it. But it is an adventure that must involve everyone, teachers, the state, and also a great commitment to study. But there's also another very important factor. All the countries with the most brilliant students share one point. That is to say, school and education are considered important by families, because that is where values and stimuluses are shaped and behavior patterns are determined. Yes, I think that this last thing that was said, that is to say that behavior is very important, should be stressed. I would like to tell you a short story of a friend of mine who has a daughter who lives in Switzerland, and she in turn had a daughter who attends school in Zurich. Very intelligent, this little girl. She was top of her form in high school. So, surprised, they gave her 3 months of period in Singapore in the schools. So, for 3 months, she went to Singapore. She said these studied day in, day out. She was top of the class of the school in Switzerland. So, clearly in Singapore, they work a lot. And talking about behavior and values, there's another story I'd like to tell you, which again opens another window into our discussion, and that is to say values and behavior patterns. My children were born in Paris, and then they went to school in Brussels, to the French schools. When they came back to Italy, they continued to study in the French school. And at high school, my daughter was telling me that at one point, it was in Rome, an American boy joined them, and he was the child of a diplomat, and so he too joined them. And there was a maths test. At a certain point, this youngster got up and he went to the teacher and said, "Those two copied." Now you can imagine what happened. He was called a spy, and he said, "Well, I did my duty as a citizen." That was an excess, because we all copied something from somebody else. I think you went to the D'Azeglio too, didn't you? Well, I had a very, very good final result, but I did copy my Greek translation. Yes, one of the things we did is that we would during the exercise, you would go and put the answer and throw it in the bin, and then somebody else would go to the bin and collect it. But I'm going to change the situation now. Now imagine that there is a class paper, but no longer in class, but for a job. Now, at that point, two who copy or others who've received help are going to steal somebody else's place. And you see that at that point, the situation changes again. And at this point, we get to the situation which we are aware of in Italy. Italy, our society has very, very beautiful situation, beautiful country, lovely people, but in the end, we have some regular shortcomings that undermine us. Let me tell you a story about this. It gives you an idea of social control. In that if people behave badly, it's not that you're considered intelligent, but somebody who behaves badly. When we were living in Rome, and my children were tiny, we went one Sunday to have a picnic in a very beautiful area close to Rome, in southern Tuscan area. It was a valley with a little stream, and we were having a picnic, and with us there was an 8-9-year-old Dutch boy who was a friend of my son Alberto, and there was somebody fishing. And close to it, it said, no fishing. So this Dutch boy, without saying anyone, said, and he said to the fisherman, you know that you can't fish here, do you? Why? Well, because that's what you have. I lived 13 years outside Italy, and then I lived and worked and traveled a lot in northern countries, Scandinavian countries, the US. That's what you do. If you behave badly, you know that, for example, in the US, if you say lying, somebody's lying, it's very bad. Clinton, for instance, and Nixon had enormous problems, not because they had committed something, but because they had lied. So I'm not saying that you should reach those, for us, distant horizons, but certainly, even in simple things. Another story, which a friend of mine told me, he was in Switzerland and he saw a busload of Italians, a coachload that stopped near a bus. Some had stayed on the bus and others went to have a bar, and they were throwing pieces of paper out of the window. A policeman came and said to the speaker, you not allowed to leave until these people pick all their rubbish up. And they had to do it. So when you have things like this happening, you get used to it. Here there is no punishment, the psychological or even fines, the punishment for those who behave badly. I'll take an example, seatbelts. I was thinking of taxation because they too are a good case in point. Well, yes, taxation. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, Lorenzo Pinna, whom you're well aware of, who is somebody who works with us, was working with us. In Rome, there is a center where there's a sort of information which collects all the information center which collects all the information and cross-references the tax statements. And I said, Lorenzo Pinta, how can people avoid taxes if there's all this control? Can't you, for example, cross-reference with other data banks? Yes. And why don't you do it? No one has asked us to. So, clearly, to get Italians to pay more tax, we've seen it during the election campaign too. It's one of the focuses. It's a bit difficult. I have a friend who lives in the United States who formerly worked as a cameraman for the Italian television and then has set up his own business. He's also become an American citizen now, and he pays tax in the United States. And he said that the first time that he had to pay tax in the United States, he went to an accountant and he said, could we here and there? And the accountant said to him, he said, do you want to go to jail? Then clearly there's tax dodging there too and things that don't work. But when there's this type of social control, well, things have become different. For example, in Italy, there is a case which is very simple but very significant, very meaningful. When they introduced the law that you had to have seatbelts, I asked my journalist to spend some time between 8 and 9 in the morning at the lights in Rome and count how many people were or were not wearing the seatbelts. And there was an average of about 7–8%. When the law it was introduced that took points off your driving license, suddenly everybody used it because there was a punishment. In Italy, there is no punishment for those who transgress, or it's so bland, so distant in time, and then quashed that this is yet another of the big problems for our country. So you yourself say that even, for example, for a recommendation, you need something like this. And when, for example, what about letters of introduction? Oh, yes, this is a big point, because letters of introduction and personal reference, and this is particularly true for the public administration, because if you're in the private sector, it might not be good, but it's something which does not damage the community. So if you want to have a letter of introduction. There's another interesting thing. I lived 4 years in Brussels, and I had also I was also a correspondent for the Scandinavian countries, and once I prepared a documentary on the relationship between citizens and the state in Sweden, and I discovered things which are a bit like science fiction here. First of all, a concept which is quite clear, but no one states very clearly. That is to say that the government and the state are two completely different things. The government represents a majority, a temporary majority of citizens who for a certain number of years have elected it so that it may develop a certain politics. The state is something that belongs to everyone. It doesn't belong only to the government. And at that point, there is this situation in Sweden that the minister cannot give orders to the ministry. He doesn't even, or he or she does not even have an office in the ministry, and all the ministers are together in one other building. I went to see the general director, the DG of the ministry, who said the minister cannot give me orders, can give me directives, and then we are the ones that organize them and implement them. Above all, the minister cannot say anything about promotions, careers, or employment. That's a crime. And this is where we have science fiction, that all public documents are public. I mean, it seems a bit of an oxymoron, but that's what I'm trying to say. For example, even the post of the minister is published, is public. So I went with a Swedish journalist from an agency. I said, this is not possible. Yes, he said, come and see. And we went, I remember, to the Minister of Post and Telecommunication, and he said to the secretary, could you please show me the minister's post? And the secretary gave it. Not everybody that goes there to do it, but this is the paradox. It gives you an idea of transparency, which we're not used to. The cases in which this cannot happen are very rare, and they're included in the law. For example, military secrets, international treaties, also some of the things which have to do with tenders, which clearly have to be reserved for a certain period of time or are covered by a secret. When you have sown some seeds like this, then that helps social control grow, and it also helps them avoid distortions. Now, this is in Italy overwhelmed due to bad habits, and other than the moral aspects, there are also damages to a system that doesn't work, because bureaucracy sometimes, well, we have data, I haven't included this clip, but for example, Germany has roughly the same number of civil servants as we do here, but the yield is twofold. That is to say, the production level, it's as if you had in a machine, you put an orange, and on the other hand, you've got, say, orange juice. Here we haven't got orange juice, but a few drops. And where's the rest been? Well, it gets lost in the machinery. There was wheel that had the wheel, which is one of the Italian trade unions, UIL, had studied something about 2 years ago, because they'd calculated that in Italy there are 1.3 million people who live off politics. That is to say, we're talking about local authorities and working your way up the system. Well, clearly, we can do the accounts a bit better, but it is quite clear that in a situation of globalization, competition, as we know, this is repeated continuously, where technology is changing the rules of economics, unemployment and employment is linked to these phenomena, because here we talk about unemployment as if there were a flood or but not asking ourselves why the unemployed point of increase? Well, because companies are not working properly. Why aren't they successful? Well, by questions, you then reach the solution of problems, but you're not looking at it carefully. You look at the terminal, the unemployment, the problem of those who can't find work, people who have been sacked, and so on. Now, I think that it's a cultural problem of our country, a problem of the intelligentsia, because all the revolution that we had, the revolution between my father and I, we've had an incredible change in our world. But culture is still the culture which, to a degree, we spoke about this many times, of the two cultures that don't meet. It's still the same. So it's not only a problem of astronomy and knowledge, though it is a very practical problem of a society that has changed and which lacks the scientific knowledge able to keep abreast with change. Since we're talking about references and personal references and introductory letters and so on, we know that this happens a lot in the public sector in Italy, which means that the people who are put in positions of responsibility are not necessarily the ones. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're very good, but sometimes they're people who are sponsored, and at that point there are major problems. We've been reading about the public prosecution who are having to deal with the most incredible scandals. This is also due not just to personal corruption, but also to a system which whereby people who are not being employed because of their qualities or skills, their personal or their professional skills, but people who've been employed for other reasons. This clearly then trickles down, and it works on with the letters of introduction and who you know than rather what you know. As we were hearing before in the clip, for example, in some countries, professors are paid very well and are trained and are selected. And this is a big issue, meritocracy in schools, because it's a very strong electoral lobby. As when Luigi Berlinguer tried to change it, he was told to leave it. So I understand there are lots of problems, but if attractiveness and justice and everything in school and research and all that doesn't work, if all these things don't work, well, at that point the ecosystem, because we live in an artificial ecosystem. You know, I've done a lot of things with ecology, with the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, with the Rome Club in particular. But ecology, seen as a natural ecosystem, virtually doesn't exist. A garden, for instance, a garden is not natural, it's completely artificial. You've taken plants from another place, you put them there, you put them together with a sort of concentration camp, and you ask them to grow. The gardens in nature are, I don't know, marshes, decomposing trees, the underbush, those are natural gardens. Agriculture never existed, or animal husbandry, for instance. Have you ever seen the chicken farms? Everything's become artificial. If you look at things here, anything that you have here in your house, electricity, pencils, paper, tables, anything that you have, and plastic, there's nothing which is natural. So we live in an artificial ecosystem, and unfortunately nobody's defending it. Nobody defends this ability to manage this increasingly complex machine via a culture that is able to deal with it. On television too, I see that there's a lot of talk when the Macbeth is broadcast from La Scala, wonderful culture, fine, or when Benigni recites the Divine Comedy, but that's not present-day culture. It's 19th century culture, which is fine, and the culture has given and still gives major works. But we haven't got the culture to understand what is happening nowadays. I remember that in 1975, so I don't know how many years ago now, I had written a book which was called Archimedes' Bath, with the undertitle, which is Culture Can No Longer Read Its Time and Rewrite It. So it has become illiterate. And I wrote this type of culture with a K. And the proofreader said, you've made a mistake. But apart from this joke, there is this, all these things don't work, and this is certainly due also to a political class that is thinking merely of winning, to be able to do what in the end? To be able to do the things that we were talking about. This is a problem that we were talking about. It's not that things are working well elsewhere necessarily, but here they're really bad. So, to talk about this in a slightly lighter way, but not so much lighter, because it should make us think. There is a cartoon by Bruno Bozzetto, who also came to GiovedìScienza, and that evening we learned a lot, but we also had a great fun. It's something that I did with Bruno Bozzetto 26 years ago, and it is still very topical. Thank you.
Would
you like to observe the who you know, not what you know? Let's observe it technically. There are three different disasters that this generates. The first one, clearly, is the moral one. In fact, in competition is no longer on merit, but on who you know. And this causes major psychological damage, not only because it is not punished, because this causes a risk of injustice, but also because it induces an imitation at various levels. This climate clearly makes the principles of honesty and justice recognizable. The second disaster is more technical, because for any activity, in fact, you need skills and expertise. If you don't do the right things, you can't obtain the necessary results. So the damage at this point is no longer just a moral one, but also an economic one. And it has an impact on the whole system, especially because it is never punished. The third disaster is possibly the worst one. If, in fact, a career is not based on expertise, but on the fact that you are complacent, the machine could not be used, it may not be used in the interest of society as a whole, but in the interest of the sponsor. Efficiency, therefore, gives way to other needs with a greater erosion of the system. You might wonder what would happen in a football team if things went in the same way. Certainly the fans would not accept people who couldn't play. International competition requires the right athletes in the right place, very efficient, and a climate of trust that guarantees the team. Now we can move on to questions, but I would like to ask a question, since we're voting on Sunday, and since I met here, and there's somebody who would like to get to know you, I met someone who wrote a book to analyze the different voting systems and the various rules of democracy. And I would like to understand what you think. Well, I mean, we all probably disapprove the current or existing, or the current election system is not very popular. Do you think there is a solution to this problem? Yes. I think this is the $64,000 question. We know that there is a general problem. When you say, well, BBC, well, the Italian Broadcasting Company, well, if you applied the BBC rules in Rome and the vice versa, the BBC would always be the BBC and the Italian Broadcasting Company would be the same, because it's the ecosystem. This is also true for electoral models, the people. in any case, you have to change the models, the rules, and also the morals, the merit, and so on. But personally, I think that there is an electoral system which I believe works quite well, and it is the municipal ones. The city, there's a mayor who is elected, and it is everybody's mayor, and he or she is everybody's mayor, and gives the stability to the municipal council and chooses the municipal government. I think we need something like that for the country too. This electoral system is called the porcellum, the pig-like system, because it makes it very difficult for you to choose the people, because you vote the list and not the people. But a proportional system, which might not be better, because we had a proportional system in the past, and we know about the quarrels, the remingling of majorities, minorities, changing majorities. This certainly gives a level of stability for a certain number of years, with the fact that the party who gets the majority also gets some extra seats. We saw the primaries of the PD, but also in cities, you have to identify a person who represents everyone and who becomes sort of shared. We need a mayor of Italy. It's not a solution, but I don't really see anything else that is better. And it's something that you do in all the large countries. In the US, and they have a president who's a bit like the mayor of the United States. In France, the system is different, and there's a bit more conflict, it's a bit more messy, but there are very many rules. But rules are worth, if you abide by the rules, it's the players who count, and unfortunately we've seen who the players are. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this answer. I feel I've understood that it's the French two terms with the sort of stability. You see the person who has written this book is quite close to this. Well, in France they have this problem that there are two types of elections, that is to say the president who has certain powers which sometimes are in conflict with the election of parliament, because they can give very different results. They have the solution with the cohabitation, as they call it.
Grazie per I suoi 40 anni di televisione.
Thank you very much, Piero Angela, for this evening, and thank you very much for your 40 years on television. Thank you.